Tons of news today, but let's start with this. This tweet has already been taken down, but I did find a screenshot of it on videocards.com, because once something's on the internet, it's never truly gone. Like a towering pillar, the Nvidia GeForce 4070 Ti is now on sale at our MSI store. So this is coming from MSI Gaming USA on Twitter. They say, experience the power of the Ada Lovelace architecture at a cost of not as bad as 4080. So I thought that was kind of hilarious that MSI's official USA page was advertising the 4070 Ti as, well, it doesn't cost as well, not as bad as a 4080, which was pretty interesting. Now, apparently that doesn't seem to be working too well because if you check PC Part Picker right now, there's lots of 4070 Ti's in stock and some of them right around the MSRP. This actual MSRP one at $799.99 I did check, and that's just a pre-order at B&H Photo, but a lot of these ones that are a little bit over 800 are still sitting in stock, so looks like people are not super happy with the 4070 Ti, even though it doesn't cost as bad as a 4080. I did agree in my review that it does provide better price to performance than the MSRP 4080, but both of them are just bad price to performance, and a 70 Ti class costing over $800 is kind of crazy. Now, in other MSI news, I want to mention this briefly because we got a lot of other big things to talk about, but the MSI Afterburner project is apparently probably dead, according to one of its developers. So first of all, if you don't know what this is, so MSI Afterburner is an overclocking software that's used by people with all sorts of graphics cards, even ones that are not from MSI. And it's looking like it hasn't been updated in a long time. And the developer, Alexei, on Guru 3D forums apparently responded to some questions about, any updates by saying no need to be that impatient, it just demotivates to do anything, and MSI Afterburner project is probably dead. And people are like, why? War and politics are the reason. I didn't mention it in MSI Afterburner development news thread, but the project is semi-abandoned by company during quite a long time already. Actually, we're approaching 1 year mark since the day when MSI stopped performing their obligations under Afterburner license agreement due to political situation. This developer's, I believe, based in Russia, or, honestly, I don't know the details. It has to do with the whole Ukraine thing, okay? Anyway. So I tried to continue performing my obligations and worked on the project on my own during the last 11 months, but it resulted in nothing but disappointment. I have a feeling that I'm just beating a dead horse and waste energy on something that is no longer needed by a company. Anyway, I'll try to continue supporting it myself while I have some free time, but will probably need to drop it and switch to something else, allowing me to pay my bills. Okay, well, this is bad news for a lot of people who use this software. For another kind of related news, though, I actually use the Riva Tuner statistics server that's built into MSI Afterburner. As some people are like, when you do your benchmark videos, how do you get all those stats up there? By using MSI Afterburner's built-in Riva Tuner statistics server. So I was actually a little bit worried here, and some people have been wondering, why didn't I show my, the power draw readings on the AMD GPUs in my latest series of benchmarks I've been doing? Well, that's because it didn't show up in this software. So it seems like there are development issues going on here. Now, according to this article from videocards.com on the topic, they do say that MSI is still officially listing the software, but then also going to, the only good news is that Riva Tuner Statistics Server is not an MSI tool. Therefore, it is not affected by the sanctions. This statistics and overlay software has full support from Alexei and will continue to be supported as it was. That said, the third-party software that uses RTSS should not be impacted. So I have a little bit of questions about that, though, because I feel like when I was trying to figure out why my new, I think it was my AMD CPU, my 7700X, wouldn't report as much stats as my 5000 series CPU, I did look into the Guru 3D forums, and Alexei had posted similar to what he's saying here about Afterburner, about it being difficult to update things due to the sanctions going on. So anyway, I think this is all bad news, and I hope that can all get back on track at some point. Now, how about this news? According to WCCFtech.com, and this does seem to be claiming their own sources, Nvidia preps mass production of 2 more AD104 ADA GPUs. This could possibly be the RTX 4070 and RTX 4060 Ti. Now, before we jump too far into this, a couple things to keep in mind. Number one, this is just information we received from our sources from WCCF Tech. Now, WCCF Tech has, claiming their own sources, leaked information correctly in the past, but I believe they've also got some things wrong in the past. Now, sometimes when something's wrong, it's not that they had, you know, it can be that things change behind the scenes before they're released, that sort of thing, but I'm just going to say that this is not a source that I would give a 100% accurate track record to, from my knowledge of just remembering previous leaks from them, but also has got things right as well. Now, where would their sources likely be? Likely a board partner or a factory, something like that, where things like this would be happening, and then somebody leaking it from there. Now, they're saying that it looks like Nvidia will be producing 2 brand new GPU SKUs for its upcoming GeForce RTX 40 desktop lineup. The SKUs are based on the AD104 die, which is the same die that is used to power the recently introduced RTX 4070 Ti. So if you're not sure about all this stuff, so the AD104, so like there's an AD102 that's used on the RTX 4090. And then there's an AD103 that's used on the RTX 4080. And then there's an AD104, which again is used on the 4070 Ti. It's a different die. However, these dies are often not fully used. The 4070 Ti does use the fully enabled chip, but if parts of it aren't working or they just artificially cut some of them down to introduce a new SKU, you can release a less powerful GPU using that same AD104 die. Now, what they're saying is that they have the NVIDIA AD104-250 and the 104-251. And they're saying that the 4070 Ti is using the AD104-400-A1. So they're saying you can guess how cut down it is based on that name. Now, maybe I'm not aware, but I'm not entirely sure just naming it 250 versus 400 actually tells you exactly how much is cut down. I mean, you can let me know in the comments section. But then the names 250 and 251 sound very similar, they're pointing out. So anyway, this is a shot of the, you know, AD104, but so they're saying that the actual boards that these cards would use are using the PG14 SKU 343 PCB on the 250 version, and the 251 version will use the PG141 SKU 345 PCB. And they're saying that the 4070 Ti is also based on a PG141 SKU, so that the board partners should be able to reuse a lot of what they did on the 4070 Ti. PCB, I guess, is what they're saying here. Now, they're saying that this has a 200-watt TGP on both of them, but they're also saying that that will likely change. And this is the most interesting part, is that they're saying that the 250 will hit production first, and it'll be in the production in the second half of February. So what a lot of people are wondering is, when will we get the more affordable, hopefully they're more affordable, NVIDIA GPUs? Well, if the first production, if this is true, is supposed to start in the second half of February, and then the 251 SKU mass production in the second half of March, then if it's not even going into production until February and March, then you wouldn't expect them actually to be available until much later in the year. And this article is saying in the second half of 2023 around Computex. So another thing I want to show is that this is not the first rumors we've seen of you know, what's going to come after the 4070 Ti. So the WCCF Tech article is claiming their own sources on this new information. Now, videocards.com has helpfully summarized some of this information in a table where we can look at the specs and other leaks we've had about what might be coming after the 4070 Ti. So we see the 4070 Ti here, and these are specs we actually know. Again, it's the AD104-400. It has 7,680 CUDA cores, it's boost clocks, and that came out on January 5th. Now, previously, we've had leaks about a 4070 and a 4060 Ti. If I'm remembering correctly, I think these leaks originally came from Copite, one of our usual Twitter leakers. But this was a 4070 rumored at 5,888 cores, and I think was also rumored as an AD104-250. And this having 12 gigabytes of GDDR6X, 192-bit bus, and a 250-watt TDP. We also had rumors of a 4060 Ti with an 8106. So this would be going down to a smaller die, an 8106-350 with, and this was 4,352 CUDA cores, and that going down to 8 gigabytes of just GDDR6, not 6X, 128-bit bus, and 220 watts. So here's where these new rumors pop in, you know, along with this. So maybe, you know, this has a slightly different board SKU being listed here, but things could have just changed since this leak came about. We're seeing this 8104-250, then we didn't get a lot of actual information here other than, in my opinion, the most interesting thing being the production in February. But I'm wondering if this is that same 4070 we'd seen leaked or just some slight tweak of that. But then it's a little bit unclear what's going on with this one. If it's still the 8104, like we have a 4070 Ti, so maybe this 250 is the 4070, but then the 4060 Ti is rumored to be on the 8106, so what would this 251 be? And is this Nvidia getting themselves in like a naming scheme trouble? Because remember, the 4070 Ti was supposed to be called a 4080 12 gigabyte originally, and they downgraded it. So now, if they already had plans for what was coming next, how does that affect all of the naming schemes? But either way, if we're not seeing the next step down until production in February and March, and then, in other words, I'm thinking if people were hoping to see like a 4070 or 4060 in the next month or two, I think they're going to be disappointed. Anyway, I think that's all the useful info we've got out of that leak. And again, can't even confirm whether any of that's true or plans could change even if it is true, all of that. But what we do see in another interesting leak, since we're on the leaks and rumors segment of the video here, I suppose, I guess I meant to move myself and I moved the whole thing, whatever, is that there's a tweet from CapFrameX saying that Nvidia is working on AI-optimized drivers that may be released this year in Q1, claiming up to 30% more performance, but an average improvement of about 10%. No info about which specific generations of GPUs would see this benefit from the driver, but also saying take this with a grain of salt. If true, NVIDIA drivers will be real. Fine wine. Ooh, shot on the AMD drivers are fine wine. Anyway, this is interesting, but again, it's a rumor, so we can't, you know, we'll see if it happens. But NVIDIA is super into using AI, not just using AI for stuff, you know, consumers do on the GPUs. But we've seen articles before about NVIDIA actually using AI to help design their GPU circuits and things like that. So getting that involved in driver optimization would certainly be interesting if they could squeeze out some more performance. But hopefully that wouldn't just be for the new 4000 series and them just continuing to lock down stuff to only the new ones. Now, this is an interesting bit of GPU news, and this is not just rumor, this is real. So Palit, who's, you know, an AIB board manufacturer, so, you know, one of the brands you can get your GPU cooler from. So they're saying they want gamers to be able to customize their GPUs even more if you have a 3D printer. So it's showing that Palit is launching a Maker project, which is a library of 3D models for a Gaming Pro GPU. So currently this is only for their Gaming Pro GPU series, but users can download a model for front plate matching any of the Gaming Pro cards. And again, only the Gaming Pro cards. And these can easily be attached to the card. And then you can, you know, get into your program and make all sorts of interesting designs. They're showing off like this T-Rex thing coming out. No, that's Godzilla, not a T-Rex. Anyway, that coming out of the thing, you know, you can paint it after you print it. Here's like a cyberpunk design. And I believe that they did clarify that as long as you only use the 4 screws required to do this replacement swap, it should not mess with your warranty. They have a whole video about it if you want to take a look at more. And again, links to everything I talk about in the video, as usual, will be in the description. But I think this is interesting stuff. It also looked like they have a smaller version for that can split it into 2 pieces. And then, you know, put both pieces on if you have a smaller 3D printer. So that was interesting. Now, in other cooler model news, we'd already seen that ASUS was going to be doing a Noctua RTX 4080 with a 4.3 slot cooler, but it looks like afterwards at CES, press were able to actually get their hands on these coolers, take a closer look at them. Guys, it's a 4.3 slot cooler. This will take up, it's going to be using up 5 slots since it goes over 4. These things are actually crazy. But anyway, so press did get a little bit more of a look at this. So let's see. They're going with, I don't know if there was too much new info here. They did confirm that it's with the Noctua NF-A12 by X25 brown and beige fan. Yeah, not a whole lot of new news there other than just, it does look like an interesting but huge cooler. In other cooler news, unfortunately this is only for the Chinese market, at least for now, but AX Gaming and Zotac have 2 new white RTX 4070 Ti's. So if you're looking for white builds, great, but currently China only, so I'm not going to dwell on too much of that one. And in other cooler news, MSI's Radeon RX 7000 lineup, well, the 7900 XTX and XT, their gaming trio classic custom designs are pictured, with just a 2.5 slot and triple 8-pin design, so, getting more power. Now, also, this is probably a good time to bring up another reason why you'd definitely be interested in the board partner designs, which in the first wave of 7900 XTX and XTs, a lot of the cards that were shipped were the AMD reference designs. And a lot of these custom cards are kind of coming in a bit later, especially the MSI ones, all of that. And that's a big deal right now because, well, AMD has clarified, remember, the overheating issues on their 7900 XTXs. First of all, these custom cards, like this gaming trio, should not have that vapor chamber issue. But let's go back to that vapor chamber issue a bit more because Der Bauer, who had done a lot of the testing to figure out it was a vapor chamber issue before AMD confirmed that, did a follow-up video. Again, I'll link it in the description. And he brings up some interesting points that I might want to reiterate here as well, which is, well, it is good that AMD did acknowledge the issue, talk about it, and say their support will help you out if you're having this problem. He did mention that it's unfortunate, and I agree with this, I'd like to know your thoughts in the comments too, that AMD didn't go as far as saying, we have identified the serial numbers for the products with an issue and we'll do a recall. Or even just publish the serial numbers that have the issue. Now, that could mean that they don't know which serial numbers have the issue, which in one way is bad. But if they do know which ones have an issue but aren't recalling them and are putting it on the customer, that's also bad. That's, I don't know, probably worse. Because if you think about this particular problem with the hotspot temperature, and if you're not, like I did the full talk, watch my last video if you want a lot more details on this in AMD's official statement. But if you leave it up to the customer to find and report the issue, remember that it's the hotspot temperature getting to 110 Celsius when the normal GPU edge temp that's usually reported by a lot of software isn't at 110 Celsius. There's a huge delta there. That's a big part of the problem. So most people, I think, buy a GPU and never look at their temperatures. Guys, you're the enthusiasts. A lot of people never look at their temperatures at all, so they won't know they have this problem when they do. And it's on them to identify it and tell AMD to get help, right? That's kind of a problem. And then also, like I said, a lot of people, even if they don't monitor their temperatures at all, and those who do often aren't monitoring the junction temperature. They're just looking at the normal edge temp that gets reported in a lot of software, so they might not know they have the problem. So it'd be nice to see AMD do a little bit more and at least give us serial numbers that have the problem, and better yet, try to issue an actual recall for those if they could identify it. Maybe they don't know which ones have the problem, but again, that's kind of concerning too. Anyway, in terms of other unfortunate AMD problems, the latest AMD AGESA firmware inadvertently disables cores on some Ryzen 5 7600X CPUs. Now, most people would not be affected by this, and this depends on your motherboard update, and it looks like this was originally a problem for several manufacturers, But but most of them have taken, so MSI and ASRock have removed the troubled firmware from their X670 and B650 motherboard product pages. However, as of the time of at least this article where I found this information from Tom's Hardware, Gigabyte had still left it up for download on some of the 600 series motherboards, so you'd want to be careful about this. Now, most people this wouldn't cause a problem to, but here's where the issue's coming in, is that some 7600X CPUs, so if you're unfamiliar, a lot of AMD CPUs, so these 6-core 12-thread and 8-core 16-thread CPUs are only using one CCD. But when you go up to the Ryzen 9s, the 7900 and 7950, those use two CCDs. Which again could each have either 6 and 6, and that's your 7900, or they could have 8 and 8 cores, which is your 16-core 7950. However, people figured out, actually this is a good time to mention Der Bauer again. So Der Bauer, a while back, 2 months ago when the 7600X first came out, was delitting a 7600X and found something unexpected, which was two CCDs in the 7600X, which shouldn't need that. Why would it have two CCDs? Well, this was probably a chip that could have been a 7900, an R9, but one of the CCDs wasn't working, but one of them was. So since one CCD was still working, this could still be used as a 7600. So I guess what's going on with this troubled firmware is that on the 7600X CPUs that have two CCDs, which you would have no way of knowing yours has two CCDs if you haven't delitted it, as far as I know, it can disable one of the CCDs, which could be the CCD that actually is working for you. Because I think when they programmed it, they must have just forgot that some of the 7600Xs had a dual CCC design. So as far as I understand it, that's what's going on there, but it's unfortunate to see another issue. Just be careful updating to the latest AGESA firmware if you have a 7600X. Anyway, we have another article on AMD CPUs. So the 7000 X3D CPUs, which I've already talked a whole bunch about, have been confirmed to have a lower TJ Maxx temperature, which is nice because they'll clock lower because of concerns with the cache. I talked about that in my last video. This is really just saying that the boxes will get a new design to be easier to spot. You can see the 3D V-cache little triangle here, highlighting whether it's a 3D V-cache version of the chip. So if you're seeing them on store shelves, it should be easier to spot. Most of the other info in this article, though, I already talked about yesterday. Now, speaking of new AMD CPUs, the X3Ds will have to wait until February, but the Ryzen 7000 non-X CPUs should be coming January 10th, which is tomorrow as of the time of me filming this video. Now, if you're confused by these, what's going on with those? Well, the non-X CPUs are basically just power limited, and I think the cheaper ones, like the 7600 at least, will come with a stock cooler, so they all come with a lower price. And then they could, the lower end ones at least will come with a stock cooler. I know it'll at least be the 7600. I can't remember if it's also the 7700. But either way, that can send you money if you're willing to work with the stock cooler. But then some of them are reportedly already going on sale early. But if you're not sure what to expect from these, if they're limiting the power, how much performance could you lose? Well, we do need to get some reviews. But I want to mention, I was actually reading an interesting, is it Anand Tech or is it Anand Tech? Well, either way, an article from them looking at comparing power limiting the 13900K versus the Ryzen 7950X. And the Ryzen 7950X seemed to hold a lot of its performance at significantly lower power targets. And so if that's true of the architecture overall, and it seems to be, then these non-X CPUs could still retain a lot of their performance, but for a lower price with a lot better power efficiency, which is interesting. Anyway, this is an interesting article. I'll link it in my description if you want to see a lot of testing on the reducing the power to see what kind of performance you can still maintain. Another thing coming out of kind of towards the end of CES, I guess it is. So AMD did their big announcement, and they didn't talk directly about the 7900 XT anymore. And we'd love to hear more about some new desktop graphics cards, but what they did talk about was how the 7900 XT is the fastest GPU under $900, comparing it to the 4070 Ti, although I will say it is more expensive than the 4070 Ti. And then if you look at my testing, I did my big comparison with the 4070 Ti versus the 7900 XT. And the 7900 XT is faster most of the time, other than when you kick on ray tracing. In light ray tracing workloads, they can be tied, but in heavier ray tracing workloads, the 4070 Ti does still take the lead, and again, it is the cheaper product. So anyway, but AMD making a big marketing claim here and showing that off. Now, in some good news for AMD, so this is, I think, actually a really big deal that should be developing further this year. So one of the reasons why people have preferred Nvidia over AMD, there are several, but one of them has been better live streaming quality, because AMD's H.264 encoder wasn't really as good as the NVENC encoder at low bit rates. It just wouldn't look as good at the same low bit rate, which is when you're live streaming, you use a low bit rate. So AV1 support has been a big deal on the new GPUs from AMD and Nvidia and Intel. But for AV1 encoding to matter, which should look good at low bit rates, and could potentially give AMD the chance to actually just close this gap. It won't be a selling point for Nvidia anymore. But you need software support for it. So first you get the GPUs with the hardware, then you need software support. Well, OBS, which I saw this update when I actually started my video today. I'm using OBS right now to record this video, and it popped up with a new feature set. One thing being the AV1 encoder support for the RX 7000 GPUs on Windows, as well as Intel's AV1 encoder for ARC GPUs. And then also support for Intel's HEVC encoder. There's some other stuff here. Digging into some more of the tweaks and improvements, it also looks like Nvidia is getting some improvements to their video and audio filters, including a mask refresh slider and support for temporal processing, which provides better quality masking. Anyway, interesting stuff here. But here's the big deal. Getting the AV1 encoder in OBS is great, but this now just means I could use it to record. I still can't use it to live stream until the live streaming services support AV1. So that's really the next big step. We've got the hardware, now we've got some OBS software support, now we need the actual live streaming services to support it, which we're hoping to see later this year, but we'll see what happens. Twitch would obviously be the big one. Now, in other Intel news, since that did touch on some Intel support, Intel's graphic driver now supports ARC 11th, 12th, and 13th gen core CPUs with one package. Basically, the big difference here is that there's no Intel graphics driver. It's now just really split off into these lines now. You have the old Intel 6th through 10th gen processor series, then you have the ARC and Iris Xe graphics comboed together, and then you have ARC Pro separately. These used to be separated, so now they're comboed into a single driver stack. So that is a bit of a change. Now getting into a few last quick little stories here. I don't cover a lot of Apple here because I'm more gaming focused, but it looks like their Mac Pro will look identical to the current model, but will lack expandable RAM, which for the kind of things you could use this sort of workstation for, sometimes going up to even 512 gigabytes of RAM is not insane or overkill. So it'll be unclear now. Again, this is a rumor from Gurman, who leaks a lot of Apple stuff. Anyway, this video is getting long. I'm not going to dwell on Apple stuff, but anyway, that's unfortunate, but it's because it's going to feature the M2 Ultra, and again, the way Apple does their SoC is that it's all soldered together and all that. There's no changing out the RAM, so hopefully they provide the amount of RAM people actually need. Now, also, it's looking like Apple's main talk, and this might interest more people on my channel, so their big focus this year, it looks like they're going to be their mixed reality headset, and if you're looking for a timeline on this, it's looking like the current rumor is that they had aimed to introduce it in January 2023 and ship later this year, but now the company is aiming to unveil it in spring ahead of the annual Worldwide Developer Conference in June. So that's the current timeline on that. Now, in other bits of hardware news, the Steam Deck could soon give easy access to your PC library. This is according to, it's looking like people looking into the code. It looks like you might be able to transfer files directly between your PC and your Steam Deck without having to re-download it off the internet, which could be useful for people. But this is not a live thing that's currently working. It's just something we kind of expect. Now, in other Steam Deck news, Digital Foundry put out a fascinating video looking at the Steam Deck trying to use Unreal Engine 5, Lumen, and Nanite and hardware ray tracing in Fortnite, which is the game we currently have that supports all of this. However, unfortunately, they had to use the Windows build to get Fortnite up and running and able to do this. Because Fortnite doesn't work well on, doesn't really work on SteamOS. I think it's an anti-cheat issue. Anyway, and they also had a bug where the software accelerated Lumen was not working, so they had to use the hardware accelerated Lumen, which it was able to do, but then they had to, that does take a further performance hit. So, but really, they were just looking into, is it possible for the Steam Deck to run these new Unreal Engine 5 stuff, which would be a big deal getting support for things. Now, speaking of support for things and meeting requirements, Star Wars Jedi Survivor does have PC system requirements, although they're just minimum and recommended, and they don't give resolution or frame rate targets, although the minimums don't seem, well, the minimum is a GTX 1070 or RX 580, and if that's really targeting like 1080p 30 FPS low settings, that's pretty rough because honestly, according to the Steam hardware survey, most people, the majority of gamers, are not on a GTX 1070 or better GPU. And the recommended requirements look like an RTX 2070 or 6700 XT, and the CPUs are Intel Core i7-7700 or Ryzen 5 1400, or an Intel Core i5 11600K or 5600X for the recommended CPUs. And they're specifically stating you do want at least a 4-core, 8-thread CPU, even on the minimums. And we're also seeing, you know what, guys, I gotta end this video. The Settlers, new Ally system requirements revealed by Ubisoft. This is kind of interesting because a lot of people thought the new Allies had basically been endlessly delayed and canceled, but the fact that it has system requirements up does mean that their recently stated February 17th release date might actually happen this time. The minimums are only a GTX 950 or Radeon 550 and 8 gigabytes of RAM and a Ryzen 3 1200 or Core i3 6100, with the recommended only being a GTX 970 or RX 470 and still only 8 gigabytes of RAM. So this one does not look like it's going to be super demanding. Just leave you with this, RTX Remix still is not officially released, but people are still using the files from Portal RTX Remix to drop into other games. We're seeing Morrowind, Half-Life 2, and WoW getting some mods. None of these are working perfectly, and it's limited what they can do. But it is interesting to take a look at some of the screenshots and whatnot with the path tracing and reflections and lighting and all that. So I am really excited to see what people are able to do with this once they have the actual tools. Nvidia did talk about these tools at CES, but they just said the public early access is coming soon, but they didn't give an actual date. And I was going to talk more about this, but I'll just leave it to you in the description. Microbenching AMD's RDNA 3 graphics architecture from chips and cheese. Guys, there's so many details here. It's kind of interesting. Honestly, it's very technical and might go over your heads, but an interesting read if you want to look at lots of very detailed little benchmarks of what's going on with RDNA 3 and how it compares to Nvidia and RDNA 2 and all of that. Tons of info here, but we got to end the video. I hope all of you have an excellent day.